Chief Justice Emeritus is currently an adjunct professor at Kabarak University Law School. He has also played a pivotal role in Kenya's constitution-making processes and has advocated for the development of indigenous, patriotic, and decolonized transformative jurisprudence in his writings and judgments. Once again, Chief Justice Emeritus, welcome to the session, and to our family of brilliant young minds. We are very honored to have you in our midst, and we are looking forward to learning more from you. Before I hand it over to you, Chief Justice, may I kindly remind you that you have 40 to 45 minutes to present. And after your presentation, we will move to a question and answer session. And once again, colleagues, as usual, for the question and answer session, please feel free to drop your questions on the chat or to raise your hand. Sydney and I will be on the lookout for your questions. And another reminder is to keep the questions concise and straight to the point. Lastly, colleagues, I would like to encourage all of you to keep your cameras on to make the session more interactive if possible. If it's not, if you're not in any position to do so, it's still fine. You can keep it off. Thank you very much. And Chief Justice, over to you.
Sorry. Just a minute. Trying to get to my thank you for the introduction, and I'll try to read my lecture in less than 45 minutes. If I need extra minutes, I'll just make an order that I continue. So this lecture briefly defines neoliberalism and transformative constitutions and their constitutionalism. It also analyzes some of the sites or locations or bases or terrains of struggle in our transformative constitution against neoliberalism that Kenyan people are engaged in. And I conclude, by giving my own vision of struggles against neoliberalism globally. And so what's neoliberalism? So neoliberalism is the ideology of imperialism. And I believe an example given by the Tanzanian scholar, Professor Karim Hiji, clarifies what a neoliberal system is. And he writes this: the over a century of Western intrusion in Afghanistan typify the neoliberal system. In the latest phase, characterized by bombings, drone attacks, and operational special forces, the Western invaders withdrew in a chaotic manner. The billions of dollars expended for the military campaign stupendously benefited the armed manufacturers in the West. But it did not and was not meant to institute a stable democratic social order. The puppet regime that propped up collapsed with the rapidity, enabling the Taliban to once again swiftly move to seize power and impose a theocratic order. Western governments have seized Afghanistan's overseas assets and blocked financial transfers to the country, worsening its status from an emergency to a calamity. The nation is now in the throes of a huge crisis of hunger and joblessness. Over 90% of the families are food deficient. Women and women-led families are the most affected by job loss and severely curtailed education opportunities. Health conditions are abysmal from one end of the country to another. While the liberal Western media engage in hand-wringing and lamenting how the US and its allies abandoned the Afghan people, in reality, the US military was never there to uphold their interests, liberate women, or deal with religious extremism and terrorism. It was there to serve a profit-driven imperial system. Under the Western hegemony, growing opium became the sole reliable way to earn a living for large numbers of rural people. That the Afghanis are now immersed in deep poverty and a harsh theocratic regime, and the women are being denied their fundamental rights, is a logical consequence of the nature of the US intervention. As in Iraq, it could not have been otherwise. It is the obverse side of neoliberal economics. So more consequences of the new liberal system to those given by Professor Ijia, given by Hartnaik. And he writes, it has been 4 decades since neoliberal globalization began to reshape the world order. During this time, its agenda has decimated labor rights, imposed rigid limits on fiscal deficits, given massive tax breaks and bailouts to big capital, sacrificed local production for multinational supply chains, and privatized public sector assets at throwaway prices. Governments are loath to upset the status quo. They pursue policies favorable to finance capital and indeed demanded by it. The sovereignty of the people, in short, is replaced by the sovereignty of the global finance and the domestic corporations integrated within it. Now, if I was to briefly relate neoliberalism in Kenya, we start with the British colonization. The British Empire stole our land and resources. It denied us freedom and pursued a policy of colonial apartheid. The empire's occupation of our country can be traced back to 1885, although Kenya was declared a British colony in 1920. The colonization of Kenya was not only economic, it was social, cultural, spiritual, and political. British colonialism was resisted at the outset. Historians have documented both colonialism and its resistance. The Mau Mau War of Independence, waged by the Land and Freedom Army, though defeated by the might of the empire, resulted in a continued quest for independence that was granted by the empire in 1963. The British Empire did not leave Kenya anyway. In an unconstitutional and illegal pact with the Kenyan government, the empire sold the stolen lands to the Kenyan people, while white settlers still occupied huge tracts of land after independence. These lands are now farmed by foreign multinationals, foreign individuals, and a multiracial, multi-ethnic Kenyan elite. It is also important to note that Kenya has continued to give facilities to American and British military bases. After independence, Kenya's exploitation by foreign capital did not end. The exploitation and from other colonies, as history records, heavily subsidized the empire's so-called welfare capitalism of 1945 to 1975. And during that period, Kenya had trade unions that agitated for workers' rights. Prices and rents were controlled, and education was subsidized. County councils gave bursaries to students who could not afford school fees. The independence government guaranteed free secondary and university education. And during this period, also, multi-party politics ceased. Kenya became a de facto one-party dictatorship from 1969 until 1991. The Central Organization of Trade Unions KOTU, became an appendage of the ruling party, the Kenya African National Union. So did the women's movement, Maendeleo ya Wanawake. Political opposition within the ruling party was not tolerated. Such dissent was punished with the detentions and expulsions from the ruling party. J.M. Kariuki was assassinated in 1975, while Dr. Oko was assassinated in 1990. Both had been seen by the ruling party as serious opponents in matters of succession. Civil society wasn't spared either. Radical lecturers in the University of Nairobi and Kenyatta University were sacked and detained without trial. Others were subjected to kangaroo trials and jail. University students, leaders were not spared of expulsions and imprisonment. It was during the one-party dictatorship in the 1980s when structural adjustment programs were imposed on Kenya. President Moi was given a great opportunity to extend his political patronage when the IMF and World Bank decreed the sale of public assets. Invariably, these assets were sold to the economic and political elite at throwaway prices. University education ceased to be free. Free primary education did not function effectively. Indeed, education was commodified, and soon other public goods, for example, health, followed suit. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, multipartyism was restored, with the first multi-party election taking place in 1992. Western imperialism still rules Kenya. At the end of the 20th century, Chinese interests started taking root with continued consolidation during the Uhuru Kenyatta regime of 2013 to 2022. Though China is in the orbit of neoliberalism, it's clear that geopolitical and hegemonic struggles, there are geopolitical and hegemonic struggles between China and Western imperialism. Neoliberalism underwent a serious financial crisis 2007 to 2009, when it became clear that neoliberalism was not the end of history. Resistance to it from the global south has not ceased. Indeed, in Kenya, struggles for a transformative and progressive constitution were also struggles against the status quo that Kenya found unacceptable and sustainable. There is no denying, however, that Kenya has not freed itself from the economic, social, cultural, and political shackles of neoliberalism and its engines, namely the World Bank, IMF, and WTO. I'm sure in this forum has African scholars who have researched in and written on this neo-colonial situation. Now, let me move now to why transformative constitutions matter. The definition or what transformative constitution is has been analyzed by a South African scholar and a former Chief Justice of South Africa, who have defined and written on transformation constitution and constitutionalism in South Africa. And what they say in a sense is that transformative constitutions and their jurisprudence collectively capture the idea of fundamental societal change through the instrumentality of law. Yet another South African judge, Justice Edwin Cameron, writes in his book about our country's most inspiring and hopeful feature, its big-spirited visionary constitution. He also narrates the fundamental transformation of South Africa under the world's most generous spirited constitution. When judges and academics seek to breathe life into transformative constitutions and their consequent implementation, such accolades are not in vain. They express ideological and political commitment to both abstract and practical visions of such constitutions. Transformative constitutions depend fundamentally on which political leadership will implement it. The leadership's intellectual, ideological, social, cultural, spiritual, and political positions become crucially important. That leadership can either consolidate the main pillars of the Constitution while it seeks to rescue its weaknesses going forward, or it can destroy, overthrow, or systematically over time subvert it. In terms of the development of jurisprudence, the idea of transformative judicial politics under a constitution that is transformative is also important. Social struggles, even within the judiciary and outside it, impact the objectives of transformative constitution, either negatively or positively. Ultimately, the core question to be interrogated is whether transformative constitutions under the implementation of a radical transformative political leadership can be the basis of a quest for a society that rescues the limitations of transformative constitutions. In other words, are these constitutions continuity of radical struggles, small revolutions that herald better societies? Such questions are important in the context of the planet where the search for a paradigm that will liberate it from the forces that dominate, exploit, and oppress it is an ongoing debate and reflection. The role of constitution and law as instruments of transformation, the agents for transformative constitutionalism, and that will be judicial officers, above public and public intellectuals from various disciplines, traditional systems, and religions. Its politics and ideology continues to engage interrogations and demystifications. With the resurrection of radical Pan-Africanism, the question of a progressive Pan-African jurisprudence for the liberation of Africa is also being discussed in the academy. Pan-African institutions, global Africa, civil society, and its various social movements. Now, in the case of Kenya, it's important to note that the Apex Court has described the transformative nature of the Constitution in a case, in the matter of the Speaker of the Senate and another, and that was in 2013, when the Supreme Court basically distinguished a transformative constitution from the liberal ones. So constitutions and law as instruments of change. The role of law in social transformation as a long genealogy when posed as a question about whether law and courts can advance, stagnate, or impede transformation and revolution. This question was a source of serious and continuous jurisprudential debates, has acquired a consensus that law indeed has a role to play in social transformation. This multidisciplinary consensus is shared by lawyers, economists, policymakers, politicians, international organizations, and think tanks. In coming into effect, the new phenomenon of transformative constitution, this debate has been both enriched and transformed. The very idea of a transformative constitution, such as those of India, Colombia, South Africa, Ecuador, Venezuela, Bolivia, and Kenya, and others, is the idea that constitutional superstructure is embedded in a theory that it will be an instrument for the transformation of society, rather than a historical, economic, and social political pact to preserve the status quo as earlier constitutions did. Now, in the case of Kenya, this transformation is seen in the objective and the purpose, of the Constitution. And here I just quote what Abi Sachs says about this Constitution. The Constitution serves as a permanent reminder of a past suffering that need to avoid its repetition, whether in old forms or new. Through Constitution, we affirm that we learn something from the dolorous history. And in 2010, the Kenyan people basically decreed that the status quo had to be changed. And in that, they resolved to reconstitute and reconfigure the Kenyan state from its former vertical, imperial, authoritarian, and unaccountable institution to an accountable, horizontal, decentralized, democratized, and responsive state. It's very clear that the 2010 Constitution seeks to reform the colonial and new colonial state in its exercise of political power and its distribution of land and natural resources. Its key institutions, particularly finance and the machinery of violence, are held accountable under the Constitution. Devolution democratizes and decentralizes the state and its political power right to the grassroots. So if the Constitution is implemented, part of the political struggles could be, it could decolonize the state and thereafter lay basis for a transformative state, depending on the ideological and political nature of the political leadership that is implementing it. And such leadership vision will be reflected in all the institutions, including the judiciary. At that stage, we could envision a transformative state born out of social struggles, developing into a revolutionary one to birth the kind of a better society the country would need. I now want to go to the other limb of this lecture, and that's where these sites of struggle against neoliberalism in the Kenyan Constitution 2010. And the one I wanted to deal with, there are many examples, but I want to deal with just a few. I want to deal with the land and resources. And the Constitution under Article 40 provides, the Constitution actually decrees private ownership of land at Article 40. But what I'm looking at is a trajectory of how that private property is mitigated over a period of time, giving hope that we could end up with a situation where land is not a commodity and land is for all people. Now, the Constitution provides for leases granted to foreigners for a limited period of 99 years. And upon expiry, these leases, land reverts to the people as Kenya as a nation and as communities. The Constitution has also created another land regime called community land, while maintaining commodified land in areas that have been issued with title deeds to corporations, communities, and individuals. The Constitution provides that these lands can be compulsorily acquired in the public interest, subject to prompt payment in full of just compensation. Since grabbed land is to revert to the state, this would resort to more available land for the people of Kenya. The Constitution provides that all lands that have been illegally acquired by whoever have to revert to the state. And Article 61 of the Constitution provides very clearly now that all land in Kenya belongs to the people of Kenya collectively, as a nation, as communities, and as individuals. Note, this section doesn't say that land belongs to neoliberalism. These provisions, contradictory and abstract as they are, pave, in my opinion, a trajectory of land struggles in Kenya that will depend fundamentally on which class controls the state in those struggles. In the short term, the Constitution envisions that some communal land, like pastoral areas, should not be commodified. It should remain the commons for collective access and use by the communities. And I believe that such discourse would have a resonance with the working people. It will sound feasible to them because the idea of commons is not alien to the African peasantries. It addresses their immediate concerns and needs and explains the devastation, poverty, and inequality that has been spawned by neoliberalism. Now, leases granted to foreigners, as I've said, that expire, are held in trust by for the Kenyan people by the National Land Commission. And it's my view, and I'm going to talk about public participation very soon, it's my view that once these lands are held in trust by the National Land Commission, there could be a national debate where people participate on how the land could be used. And such land, I'm quite certain, if there was public participation, would cease to be commodified land. Issues of food sovereignty, of course, is very, very, very important in these, struggles. The idea of public, of compulsory acquisition, of course, is targeted at the landowners, and in Kenya there are landowners who own huge tracts of land. I think the Kenyatta family owns, according to a book that has come out, 500,000 acres. Kibaki and Moi have 500,000, and then other, rich people of black, brown, and white colors own 1,000,000. But that also comes from the Oxfam report that now says very clearly that Kenya has 8,300 billionaires, some billionaires in USD, and their assets, whether it's land, insurance, buildings, banks, and so forth, the assets equal the assets of the rest of us, 48 million. That gives you an idea of the stark inequality that is in our country. Article 68 of the Constitution is also very interesting, although the Parliament hasn't enacted that legislation. But Parliament is being told to pass a legislation that prescribes minimum and maximum land holdings, acreages, in the respect of private land. And that is, of course, directed at big landowners. Because if the maximum acreage is fixed, then those lands will have to revert to the state, and the owners will be paid, compensation. So with all the land that the National Land Commission can assemble in trust for Kenyans, going forward, and given the public participation that I've talked about, it's with a progressive and transformative political leadership, one can see radical land redistribution, equitable sharing of resources, and a movement towards land, that is belongs to all Kenyans as a people and as a nation. So let me then, that's a land, and I've just emphasized the provision that I see will be sites of struggle against neoliberalism. Because if you're going to fight multinationals in Kenya that farm tea, coffee, etc., if you're going to fight the comprador bourgeoisie in Kenya that owns huge tracts of land, even if you are going to pay, compensation, that will be resisted by them and their masters, neoliberalism. But it's what I'm trying to show is that there are sites that can be utilized over a period of time to either mitigate or fundamentally change the status quo in land. The Constitution also has a chapter on alternative political leadership, and that is chapter 6. It's called Leadership and Integrity, and it's very clear in the very clear about the kind of leaders, political leaders, that Kenya should have. And I've always said, in my view, that if it was implemented, there will be an abolition of the executive, parliament, and maybe the entire civil service. It will be a judicial revolution if there were public interest litigation petitions that basically said that those in power violated that chapter. But the issue of this chapter 6, the integrity and so forth, the High Court gave a great decision that if implemented, they would have had the consequences I've described. But the Court of Appeal overturned them, and the matter has never been heard in the Supreme Court. Although we've seen cases in the Supreme Court that basically suggest that that chapter has to be implemented. And so integrity in public leadership is critical to the new vision of the Constitution that now decrees against thieving and corruption, etc. The other side of struggle that I've referred to before is the sovereignty of the Kenyan people and their right to participate in all societal matters. Indeed, if the Kenyan people took this responsibility and duty effectively, and the reason why this is not happening is because we're still dealing with politics of monetization and ethnicization. That would mean that our investments will be subject to public participation. although at the moment a lot is being done under public interest litigation, but it will just mean that every contract, whether it's the one that the Americans now have with Kenya on trade, if that agreement was subjected to public participation and explained, the judges have said very clearly what public participation means. It's not just the usual rallies, it's about the people understanding the consequences of those investments, and if necessary, translated in a language that they can understand. And that would empower them to basically reject some of these contracts that, or investment agreements that are known to be very, very, very problematic. There are rumors that some of them, like the Chinese ones, are written in Mandarin, and I don't know which Kenyans signed them. And when they studied Mandarin, I could read and write in that language. So participation of the people as that I've described, our democracy and the participation of the people are both fundamental pillars of our development. And I've said the court have ruled on that public participation. So the issue is implementation. The other side of struggle that now I want to go to as I get towards the end is the devolution. The Kenya Constitution has devolved political power and resources. We have 47 counties, and those 47 counties, get resources from...
Sorry, Chief Justice, may I intervene?
Yeah.
Just to remind you that we are left with 10 more minutes. Thank you.
Ah, okay, but you remember what I said? I hope I don't have
yes,
to
I remember. I have it in mind.
Yeah, but I won't subject you to that. I was talking about devolution, which is a devolution of political power and the resources. And in these 47 counties, some of them have been beacons of public participation, non-corruption, the use of resources, consultation with people, and they have become, the imagination of changes, from the grassroots, and they have also captured the imagination of people that resources, if not wasted or stolen, if it's properly utilized, they can bring about change, in the grassroots. The final site that I wanted to discuss is our modern and progressive Bill of Rights, particularly Article 43 of that Constitution, which provides for economic, social, and cultural rights that reinforce, of course, the political and civil rights. And so during the pandemic, the people breathed life into this particular article because there were demands for food, the right to food, the right to universal health care, the right to clean water, social security, and education. And of course, in my view, this particular article was the object of it was to give Kenyans a site of struggle against neoliberalism, because it's neoliberalism that completely decreed against, universal education, free education, universal healthcare, freedom from hunger, housing, sanitation, and all. Because that's all those who are left to the market. But these sections are basically saying the state has to grant these rights. There are exceptions where they basically say the state can actually claim it doesn't have resources, and the issues of progressive realization, of those rights. But those are being contested now through public interest litigation. And the questions are, if the resources continue to be stolen and wasted, when will the progressive realization end? And if the state says it doesn't have resources, when will it have resources? It should answer that question. So there's going to be robust public interest litigation on that aspects. And those are some of the sites of struggle that people are engaged in. And there are many that I could have been discussed, but I picked those ones. So in conclusion, I just want to observe that although the sites of struggle against neoliberalism exist in the global north and global south and are being utilized, the solidarity against neoliberalism between global north and south, that was the World Social Forum's objective, is in the process of being rebuilt or being rethought. And I think the consciousness that will come out of this solidarity must envision a new planet out of the current status quo that I've talked about. And personally, my vision of a new planet is one that is free, just, gender just, non-sexist, peaceful, non-militaristic, ecologically safe, egalitarian and equitable, non-racist, non-ethnic, prosperous, and also socialist. I know the debates rage, in the historization and interrogation of socialism, that collapse in the country that sought to develop socialist societies. And the debate is not confined to those countries only. Indeed, Global South is robustly engaged in those debates. So what Walter Rodney calls links and continuities is insightful as we build, on the strength of the revolutionary paradigms and creatively rescue, their weaknesses. So going forward, I see a planet that will require great solidarities between the people of the North and the people of the South. If that doesn't happen, then there's only one consequence, and that will be the end of the planet as we know it. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice Emeritus. It was really an educational session. And thank you for defining for us what the new liberalism is. I'm very overwhelmed because there's a lot of information that's important that you shared with us that I have to digest. And I found the use of Afghanistan and Iraq examples very relatable, because what we see with hegemonies now is that they seem to have to contribute towards vulnerable countries being more progressive, but in the latter, they are doing the exact opposite. One key takeaway also that I want to comment on is how the law can be used for the people to have a transformative constitution, which depends much also on leadership, meaning it can either consolidate or destroy or subvert. Having said that, now, colleagues, the floor is open to those who have questions, concerns, and feedbacks. Thank you. Yes, please, Faris, you can go ahead.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Thank you for the wonderful lecture. My question is simply about the relation between the use of social and economic rights as they stipulated in the constitutions to inform the political process in a way that you would direct or orient the political the public policy towards counter neoliberalism and provides more inclusive economy. So my question is, would that be a better choice than just employ them within the judicial power?
Yeah, I think so. I think the judiciary decides cases that are filed there, and although it's developing a progressive jurisprudence, but even that has to be used to mobilize people the way you envisioning, because those decisions should be the basis of what I've called sides of struggle. I should have said that the judiciary is a site of struggle. Definitely, because there are struggles there, the probably different visions, but the High Court has been very, very, very instrumental in progressive interpretation of the Constitution. The other two superior courts have seesawed, on a lot of these issues, but the decisions, whether they are right or wrong, they are used by social movements, to basically carry out these struggles. And if they are positive, that is also the basis of mobilization and organization. And I think that's where as we all know, that's where the change will come from. It won't come from the institutions that are still fighting for their independence and resources. So that mobilization I was talking about in counties and through radical political parties, now there are a few. That is where the connection, between law and transformation comes in. There has to be a political instrument that takes that forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Faris.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Sydney, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Simi. Prof, one thing that really strikes me is at your very last conclusion of the lecture is that you say how you see us getting to this planet you envision for us is a collaboration between the peoples of the South and the peoples of the North. And I would like to draw parallels with one of your friends, Professor Isa Shivji, who writes and believes that constitutions don't make revolutions, but revolutions make constitutions. That is to say that, to use biblical terms, for you to enter the promised land, you must have gone through tremendous seasons or tremendous eras of suffering. So for us to get to this point where there is so to say a natural collaboration between the South and the North, does it mean that it will be as a result of the entire world having hit rock bottom, and then the natural or the most reasonable, next step to take is to collaborate and go up? Now, I ask this because around the time when COVID struck, and it seemed to us that the whole world was suffering, it was not just the South this time. In fact, others could argue that, the North took a bigger hit. We didn't see this happen. So I don't know the magnitude of, the calamity that needs to hit the world for us to forge forward towards the planet you imagine for.
Okay, Sydney, let me first comment on what my professor, mentor, and friend, Isa Shivji, says. It's true, he says that constitution don't make revolutions, but revolutions make constitutions. But it doesn't end there. When I talked about sites of struggle, that is his theory as well. Sites, locations, terrains, or bases of struggle. And what he actually says is that we've got to have, like in the case of land, okay, have a theory that translates into political demands. And that's what I've tried to do in my lecture, was to show that within the constitutions, these sites can be used to come up with political messages of transformation, and the political parties can actually use it. And I think it's my understanding of is a subject of why constitutions matter. It's because he's also relying on other African Marxists, Samir Amin, Walter Rodney, Michel Mugo, who writes about the liberated zones. And they all talk about these continuities and linkages, or small revolutions that lead to big revolutions. And they see, and this is where the creativity comes in, that if a constitution gives a site of struggle that can be used effectively to fight neoliberalism and to mobilize people against neoliberalism and against its agents in the country, in the short term, medium term, long term, that's important. The kind of global solidarity that I was thinking of is what the World Social Forum tried to create. But we have also seen it with Black Lives Matter. When George Floyd was killed, that's when I noticed the many mass actions in actually the African world. I didn't know that the global Africa was that huge, and there was a connection there. But as I keep on saying, going back to the issue of political leadership, what kind of political leadership will bring those solidarities, together? I think in the global North, it's the challenge is to create some consciousness where they realize, the people of global realize what is happening to Afghanistan, what is happening to Palestine, what is happening to Kenya and these other countries. Okay, solidarity will have to be created through those kind of struggles. And I see in the case of the occupation and colonization of Palestine, Kenya has a group that supports them and has links. A lot of research needs to be done actually around those links that and solidarities that are happening, even within East Africa. The public interest litigators are coming together, to work together, and that might go beyond East Africa to to the rest of Africa. But I think within our continent, we've got to have those solidarities. And I can see them happening in East Africa, around militarism, for example, now in Somalia and DRC. A lot of young people are raising issues about that, saying basically that those are the people, Somalis are sisters and brothers, and the people in DRC have been exploited for a long time, and we shouldn't have armies from East Africa, in those places. So these narratives are important, particularly among the young, because the youth, because the liberation of Africa is really your responsibility and duty. I think we can't rely on the current leadership to do that. And I think that's why people are talking about Gaddafi and the issue of African currency. That's why they talk about reparations, talk about Pan-Africanism or people to people. There are a lot of discussions going on, and if the transformative constitutions can give sites where those discussions can take place and political formations can exist, that is what I was saying, that I can't imagine the inequalities that are currently happening, the bombings and the drones and the exploitation that still continues of countries of the global north. I don't see it being sustainable. But just like in the Vietnam War, the students and others were part of the anti-war effort, okay, while the Vietnamese were fighting. There are examples of those solidarities I was talking about, and I hope that the World Social Forum, which had the objective that another world is possible, will be resurrected, and that those discussions can be the basis of these solidarities between the North and South.
Thank you very much for that. And I see two hands from Victor and Grace. Sorry, Victor, I would have to take Grace first. We are trying to promote gender balance. So Grace, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Simi, and a good evening to you, Justice Emeritus, Mr. Willy Mutunga. Well, my question is geared towards neoliberalism in a more economic sense. Some have understood it as a thought that wants to promote sustained economic growth with the aim of achieving human progress, well aligned with minimal state intervention in economic and social affairs, etc. My question is how you would consider the nexus or the interaction between neoliberalism in Kenya today and public debt. Because especially as we address the Kenyan economy and sustainable economic growth, as we address achieving economic, or rather achieving human rights in general within this country, we have to consider public debt in this country. And also as we consider transformative constitutions, to what extent have we as a country been able to achieve constitutionalism, which really is the idea of limiting government? As a Kenyan, I tend to think that the government may have been a bit generous in its approach to public debt. So have we really achieved constitutionalism as far as public debt is concerned? How can we bring in constitutional considerations into the question of public debt? As far as neoliberalism is concerned, as we address sustainable economic growth, there has to be an intergenerational consideration, whereas the current generation tries to achieve economic growth. Are we doing this at the expense of future generations? I think initially, as we thought about public debt, I personally imagined that, we'd hear that, oh, the average Kenyan, by the time you're born, you already owe various countries around the world 100,000 Kenyan shillings as a single Kenyan individual. I thought the ramifications will be in the distant future, but now here we are facing very serious inflation that maybe to an extent can be connected to public debt and the extravagance that can be attributed to Kenyan government. So how can these different issues be considered, or what will you think to be the nexus of these issues? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I quoted this guy, Patnaik, who I just quoted because he was coming from economics, and he talked about how labor rights are decimated, impose limits on fiscal deficits, massive tax breaks and bailouts to big capital, sacrifice local production for multinational supply chains, and the privatized public sector assets that throw away prices. But the question you asked of the national debt, I haven't research into it. I know what we all is on the Treasury website, right? Maybe you can check there to get the the figures. That is, if they are giving us the right figures, because Kenyans don't say that our government tells the truth by accident for no reason. So you can check there. But the way I relate the national debt to the Constitution is through what I've called public participation. Okay, where I've basically said that if, as Kenyans, we took the responsibility and the duty, okay, to be involved, these economic and social projects, all right? Because it seems to me that one can go to the Kenyan courts, the High Court now, and say and demand that they be given certain information, Article 35, and most likely the government will be ordered to, to give that information. So it has to be, if we don't breathe life into that constitution as citizens, what is that sovereignty for? That we are supposed to be, that the constitution says in Article 1, sovereign power, resides in the Kenyan people, and that we donated, or we delegated to Parliament, the judiciary, and other institutions. So we've got to seek this constitutional value of public participation. It's important. That's how it is, because if we stay divided, politically, so that if certain questions are being asked, they are ethnicized, and people from that particular community might not support and so forth. So that is a political question. We've got to deal with those political issues, so that when we know how much is the national debt, there are certain debts, of course, that can be challenged, but it's because when they happen, the public doesn't get involved. The government goes negotiating. The issue we have had with the SGR contracts, which now President Ruto says that he's going to disclose. President Uhuru didn't disclose them, all right? And I suspect it's because there are provisions that were basically corrupt ones. So that is the connection, and that's the connection that I've been trying to build of basically saying, we look at Article 35, it says we can ask any information that we need. You can even go to and ask to get the worthy declarations of all public officers. That is possible. And so national debt is the same thing. But if we don't accept this duty and responsibility of public participation in societal matters, I think the status quo will remain. If you don't, for example, as young people, if you don't question the commodification of education and what is happening, if you don't question the issues of social security, it's in the Constitution, okay? Clean water, all these are sites that can be used at least to make sure that the Kenyan government has checks and balances. Now it doesn't have, and I don't see when it's going to have those checks and balances unless we as citizens become the sovereign opposition by monitoring the government and the opposition, because you don't know when they're going to have a handshake. And once you have a handshake, as you know, a kind of dictatorship we had, they occupied the entire political space, because one faction of the government teamed with the opposition and the other faction said it was the opposition. A Kenyan dictatorship that basically closes all the entire political space. So that's, for me, it's the answer to national debt and all other issues that affect the material interests of young people. They are there, whether it's unemployment, what you can use in your political movements, social movements, and the political parties that you join to basically struggle, for these rights. Kenyan students in the past have always done it, and I don't see why, Grace, you can't do it.
Thank you very much. Victor, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
You can go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So my question is, well, first of all, thanks a lot, Chief Justice Emeritus, for the talk. It was quite enlightening. And my question is about the contestations about neoliberalism. So we've had for over 3 decades now, especially in the global South, people having this uproar about neoliberalism. But again, I would like to talk about Latin America. Over the past few years, we've seen also the rise of the right in places like Chile. Just recently, we had a referendum that was significantly defeated. The draft constitution was defeated, which was, of course, very leftist and socialist. And so my question is, maybe is it time that we accept that neoliberalism is, part of our reality? And just like Chinua Achebe says, where one thing stands, another thing can stand beside it. So by this, I mean accepting neoliberalism and maybe coming up with alternative solutions, like, say, the welfare state we see in Europe, for example. Because for many years, just recently, again, we had Ghana, which, of course, had said they're not going to the IMF for IMF and World Bank. But eventually they, had to approach these Bretton Woods institutions. And also when you talk about something like, say, WTO, can we also say that sometimes it helps Africans or also the global South access various markets? So essentially, I just mean, can we accept neoliberalism as a positive thing for the global South? Thank you.
Yeah, Victor, let me tell you my favorite joke about the question you've asked. It's a joke I was told when I was in Guatemala about the Mexican president calling his people, and it was a televised address, and he said, "I have good news and bad news. The good news is all our debts have been forgiven, all of them. But the bad news is we have 48 hours to leave this country. It doesn't belong to us." So if that's what, if you say there's something positive about neoliberalism, that's what it is, with national debts and Kenya worrying whether Mombasa port has already gone to the Chinese, what is being called legal colonization by the Chinese. And although Victor, you've rightly talked about the neo-fascists, whether it's the guy, is he called Bolsonaro, the guy who which country is it? Brazil.
That's in Brazil, Bolsonaro and Lula. But in Chile, we had after Pinochet, and now currently we had this new draft constitution that was leftist to counter the neoliberal aspect of Pinochet.
Yeah, I think the struggles in Latin and South America against neoliberalism have continued. We're talking, yes, about Mondi in India, and we're talking about that Bolsonaro and other neo-fascists. But we also have to talk about the victory in Colombia, okay? Because there are certain victories that we are seeing which tell us that there is fierce resistance, in various countries in Latin and South America. I mean, there was Venezuela, so you do get examples where neoliberalism is challenged because the consequences that I've given in my talk, by quoting Karim Hiriji, by quoting the Patanaiki, and even if we relate it to our own country, we can see people are fighting to have access to land. They want education decommodified. You know, they want universal health care. They want clean water. All those demands are being made against our leadership and against neoliberalism. So I think that the consequences are there clear, whether it's America, where the inequalities, you know, are totally unacceptable, and where the people are, resisting. That's why I got the idea of the possibility that there could be solidarity between, the North and the South. But my reading on neoliberalism and the kind of history I've given of our experience as Kenya since British colonialism and what has happened to us and continues to happen to us, I think we would, once we accept it, we are enslaved. So we just have to struggle on. And I'm sure if you talk to Professor Gathi about the new trade agreement between Kenya and America, he'll be able to tell you, where I'm coming from. And the tragedy of the Kenyan government is that they wouldn't ask Professor Gathi to advise them. As, a professor who would have just shown them the pitfalls and suggested what kind of a pact would be in the national interest. So I think, Victor, that will be my position, but we can debate that physically at some point, okay? We exchange reading lists. You bring yours and I bring mine, and then we see whether there's some consensus.
Thanks a lot, Prof.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice Emeritus, for responding to those questions brilliantly. Colleagues, do we still have more questions? Going once, going twice?
Good.
If not, then I'll leave Professor Ohio to mention something if he has any, just brief comments, and then afterwards followed by Professor Gathi. Thank you.
Are you asking me if I have anything useful to add? No.
Okay.
Okay,
so,
ask Professor Gathi to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, you would just want to say a massive thank you to Chief Justice Emeritus. It's really been insightful and really an excellent presentation. And it comes on a very interesting date. So I am Nigerian, and today is Nigeria's Independence Day, celebrating 62 years of independence. And I really wonder how much we can learn in terms of the possibilities of a transformative constitution and the fact that constitutions do matter, as Chief Justice said. Because in the Nigerian case, we have an election coming up. Obviously, we know Kenya just went through one, and I hope that would be one of the sites of struggles that will be addressed. But I know it's a very politically charged area. But I think it's also one aspect or a place or a terrain where we need to see transformative constitutions really put to good effect. And again, one of the very useful points, one very important point made by Chief Justice Emeritus is the need for public engagement and participation. No matter how innovative the Constitution is, if the Chief Justice Emeritus mentioned a number of innovative provisions we have in the Kenyan Constitution, but if these are not given expression and engaged with, then that constitution remains dead, or remains just letters and does not really have any effect in reality. So there are lots of things I believe we can extrapolate and learn from that can be transferred to other sites of struggle across the African continent from the points we hear today. The beauty is that this is recorded, it will be uploaded, and we'll be able to come back to it and be able to digest more some of the very important points Chief Justice Emeritus has mentioned. So I'll hand over to Professor Gatti to make some points. Okay. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you speak to us today.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Professor Munu, for those great reflections on Nigeria's, I believe, 66th independence celebrations.
It's 62.
62.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Still relatively young.
Yeah. First of all, just to say how delighted I am that the academic forum has continued to thrive. Excellent moderation, Simi, and thanks Sydney as well for keeping this going. I have been glued since the beginning, this has been really useful. Since I'll call him Willy said, neoliberalism is the ideology of imperialism. I was glued, and what that really reminded me about was one of the themes that ran through your lecture about how perhaps one of the tools we have, transformative constitutionalism, might offer a counterpoint to the incomplete decolonization of our countries and the continuities of all the dispossessions, the colonial ones and then the post-colonial ones that African peoples did to African peoples. Really first to thank you, Willy, for continuing to be very accessible, and also for your humility. Many of the things you said about the struggles of the last several decades, you have been central to those struggles, from your days in Dar es Salaam, and then, your detention without trial and all those various stages in the struggles, not just in Kenya, but in many places. And also to continue to thank you for, one of the things that I really love about Willy is that he's a real intellectual. So I met him several weeks ago, and I came back with these books that I'm really enjoying. One of them is about him, Willy Mutunga, Our Hero of Justice. It's a semi-fictionalized biography for young people. If you're looking for Christmas gifts, this I'm sure is available somewhere. I highly recommend it. This is just another way of saying, thank you for keeping not just the intellectual engagements alive, but also, one of your many mentees, and I'm one of them, has said that you're keeping alive the Dar es Salaam spirit, which I think we need to counter many of the ideas that we imbibe when we go to law school or to the university that are primarily Western driven, Western based ideas about how to organize our constitutions, how to organize our economies. And I can't thank you enough for keeping alive the very important ideas that are coming from our continent and our people, and for inspiring us in the academic forums. So I don't take any credit for this. It's really the academic forum that does all this, and I thank you very much for being here with us today. This has been great. So thanks, and back to you, Simi.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you very much, professors. And once again, thank you very much, Chief Justice Emeritus, for honoring the invite. We really learned a lot from this exchange. And thank you to Sydney, if they're still around. And thank you to all colleagues for making it once again. It's always a great time to be here. And I think now it's the end of the session. Oh, yeah, there is Sydney. Thank you. Thank you as well. We have come to the end of the session. Thank you for being here and taking your time, and have a lovely weekend. Thank you.
But we thank you, Simi, as well. So nobody has thanked you. So I'll do that on behalf of everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Same to you. Thank you.